Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran Kansas City jazz saxophonist Matt Otto on the 2023 CD Kansas City Trio. This is the first in a series of albums coming out and was spurned by motivations over the COVID-19 hiatus to record more work. Over his career, he has recorded on well over 50 albums, each one a snapshot of his continuing and deepening relationship with improvised music for the past 3 decades. We cover quite a bit of ground in this interview. Enjoy. Great to see you, man.
Good to see you too, man.
How's life?
Oh, pretty good.
Hey, man, it's great to catch up with you with the new album. I know we've done this several times on Neon Jazz. Yeah. It's a wonderful album. I've had time to really sink into it, and it just really, again, showcases your evolution, bringing in a lot of good cats to collaborate with. So thank you for taking a minute out.
My pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed listening to it.
Yeah, it was wonderful. So I think the one thing before we get into this album is, how did you get through the pandemic? How did you, I mean, it did its own thing to everybody and the jazz community. How did you get through it? And how does this album feel to have in this kind of post-pandemic era?
Well, it was definitely a wake-up call for me in so many ways. I mean, obviously, I had it relatively easy compared to so many people. I was allowed to work online as a teacher, so I was teaching online during that time. But both of my fathers, my stepfather and my father, both died during that. So That was rough.
Yeah.
And it was hard to actually organize the memorials and all that because no one could fly and no one could really congregate. So it was a rough time. But it also made me realize that when I got out, I needed to do more recording and just share more of the music that I work on every day. And just that, like, that's more of my purpose, you know. If I have a purpose, it's probably that, you know, making music and sharing it. So I just, when we got able to record and be out in public and go to studios and make music together, I was like, started recording a lot. And that is the first product of that, this trio CD. But I did record enough for maybe 4 trio CDs. So I will maybe eventually get some more of that out. I tried to pick takes that made a nice listening experience overall. So the album that's coming out this month on Origin, it just came out, has a couple more of the trio tracks from those dates on that album. I think there's 4 trio tracks on that as well. But those are all originals, and I was trying to make mostly a standards album on this last one. So,
talk to me a little bit about this album, specifically the Kansas City Trio, about the cats that you picked to assemble around it, how you felt like everybody worked on the album, and just kind of your overall feeling of how it came out.
I think for a lot of sax players, or a lot of improvisers, trios is a great setting because there's, you know, you got your bass, your rhythm section is ostensibly just the bass player and the drummer. And so it allows, as a sax player, it allows you a lot of harmonic freedom, melodic freedom, and there's a lot of space in the sound automatically because of the lack of a chordal instrument. And I think it's the same if you're a piano player just playing with just bass and drums and you're kind of the orchestra on top. I like that. And so I've always enjoyed that. I think a lot of sax players do. And I also enjoy playing standards because that's what, you know, we grew up doing. That's what my teacher taught me when I was in junior high. And it's always been what I really work on. And yet I haven't really ever recorded a standards album. So I thought I would try that. And so I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the, giving myself permission to do a standards album. I enjoyed the whole thing of getting the players together. And then we did the sessions like we did a gig. We would just play a tune. I mean, I guess the caveat being we did do multiple takes if we felt like we were kind of getting somewhere with the arrangement or with the vibe of the tune. But in general, we kind of I just called tunes. We didn't have anything prepared. I would just call tunes in the studio, and the guys would be like, yeah, we know that, and we'd do it, and we'd do a few takes, see if we get anything from it, and then we just kept doing that till we were out of time. And so each of the sessions were like that, just calling tunes, and so it was really fun. It was just like a gig, kind of low pressure, and I really, really enjoyed it, doing it. I also really liked the different players. I basically just hired whoever could do the date. I call some of my favorite guys, and if they could do it, I put them in. So I had several dates booked ahead of time, and then I just found people who could do those time slots.
So who was on this particular album? If you want to kind of highlight who they are and your history with them.
Yeah, sure. So Jeff Harshbarger plays bass on a lot of it, and Jeff's, local strong bass player in town, creative spirit. He's one of my, I've known him since I moved to town, and we played together. I heard him the day I moved to town. And so, I've known him 14 years or so. I consider him a good friend, and he's a great musician. So he's playing bass on several of the tracks, and then Ben Leifer's playing bass on the first four tracks. Ben also, I've known him since I moved here. I actually met him on MySpace before I moved here, back when MySpace was still a thing. And he was young. I mean, I might have been 18 or 19. But I reached out to him on MySpace, said, "Hey, I'm moving to town. He seemed like a jazz musician in town, and he was working a lot as far as I could tell." So we ended up playing right away. And then, the last bass player is Bob Bowman, who, he was the kind of one of the older, great players in town, and has since moved near Bozeman, Montana. But he still comes through town, as you know, and plays frequently. We just played in LA last month together, and he's a great world-class bass player. He's played with everyone, and he's just got amazing musical mind. So he's on the last two tracks. And then the drummers are Marty Morrison, who is originally from Hannibal, Missouri, but now works down in Springfield at the university there. He's the head of the jazz department, more or less. And I met him through Dave Scott, great trumpet player. Dave's known Marty for years, and so I met Marty through Dave. We did some gigs, and then I love the way he plays. He's got a great, this big beat, which is kind of a very specific way of playing time that's kind of rare these days, but he has it. And in fact, we played last month when I played with Bob. We had Joe LaBarbera on the gig, and Joe has that same beat. It's a big beat. It's like so fun to play with it. And so Marty's on the first three tracks, and then John Kazillermut's on the next group of tunes. I don't know a ton about John's history. We've played together a lot and talked a lot. I think he came here from, I want to say, Iowa, after doing a degree or two. Amazing musician, plays piano, vibes, drums. He's a great composer, classically trained percussionist, amazing at playing Latin, Cuban, like all sorts of drums, and amazing feel. Really great swing drummer. I mean, just a really authentic and deep guy. Listens well, interacts well. So I love playing with John. He also has a very demanding presence in terms of his timekeeping. He really keeps a buoyancy in the group and doesn't allow things to go below a certain threshold of has a really high integrity for time and interaction. So I enjoy playing with him. And then the last drummer is Brian Stever on the last two tracks with Bob, and Brian is like just one of the most creative drummers I've played with. He's just got a super unique voice on the instrument, a really unique way of a really great relationship with space. He plays with a ton of space and like space between beats, space on the kit. And so playing with him is like really, he's just really creative and wonderful to play with. So he and Bob, they worked really well together as well. I mean, I think Brian plays great and Bob, they play great with everyone, but they particularly have a interesting connection when they play together. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the rhythm sections.
So talk to me a little bit about what you hope the listener gets from these albums.
Well, I guess the way I listen to jazz, I mean, I would hope they would like listening to it the way they might like listening to similar types of jazz. So, I listen to mostly jazz from the 50s and 60s. That's what I listened to this morning. I listened to some Dexter this morning. I listened to Jackie McLean this morning. Tina Brooks, I'm not sure how you say his name. I listened to him this morning. So, I just like people who improvise melodically. I mean, that's about as simple as I can put it. I like melodic improvisation. I love the modernists, who I consider to be like Joe Henderson, Coltrane. I like modern players, but modern in the context of like the music from the 50s and 60s. I'm not like, I feel like that's still where the real magic lies during that time. Partially probably because of economics. There was a lot more opportunity. Like you've got like Miles, the Plug Nickel recording, right? He plays 7 nights, or maybe he played longer, but they recorded, 7 CDs or something. I think maybe it's less, but I had all those and listened to those to death. And, that's a hard thing now. I mean, you do have the Green Lady, which, arguably allows them to have the same band for a long time, but it's not really a listening venue per se. The players are great. And it gives them an opportunity to develop something, but, to have like this kind of emphasis in creative art at a club for that long with the same touring band, it's pretty. And then, you're talking about the best players in the world. It's just like that heyday of creative art in jazz is just, I don't think it's ever come around again to that extent. So that might have something to do with it. And the civil rights movement, infusing this with such an important kind of energy and meaning. So, it's just the best. And to me, it's the best jazz. But, maybe I sound like an old person by saying that, but I just, that's what I listen to. And so I was trying to make an album that I thought might fit into that listening schematic, where, if you like Sonny Rollins Trio, maybe you'd like a track from my album. Not to say that I'm, remotely like Sonny, but nonetheless, that kind of just a nod to that.
Yeah, I feel that. I definitely feel that. The one thing that's kind of the backdrop to what everybody's doing now with new albums coming out and live music picking up is, from my perspective, I'm kind of looking at the health of this community that we're in. There was talk for a while that people were leaving big cities and getting out of jazz, and there was no work and it was hard to make a living, but it seems like things are stronger than ever now. What's your beat on the community coming back and things resuscitating?
Yeah, I think I think everyone who plays jazz seriously does it for the love of the art. I mean, we would play jazz if there was zero money in it. And that goes from me to Pat Metheny. I mean, it doesn't matter how famous you are or how much money you're making. You would be playing jazz regardless of the money. And that is absolutely the case. So I don't think it ever really wanes in terms of it being a viable human art form, an important one. But I think, economics is a huge determining factor as to whether you can do it consistently. And you could imagine if you're trying to pay the bills and raise a family and you can't play music to do it, it means you have to do something else, and that takes time away from the art form. Whereas if there's a thriving kind of community where there's work, you can play, say, like, at the Blue Room or any number of venues in town and make a living to an extent, maybe teach a little on the side, and you can basically be working on your art form while making a living. And that's ideal. I think that's a lot easier in smaller cities. Cost of living here is a fraction in New York or LA, and that's huge because the gigs pay about the same, and they might even pay better here, at least for the little guys. I consider myself a little guy. I'm not like a big jazz star. And so for little players that are just, who love the art form and do it all the time, it's easier to live in a small city. Having lived in New York and just like I worked 6 and 7 nights a week and was struggling week to week to pay my rent. And, I think I could have probably done that indefinitely, but the idea of like being able to have a little less economic pressure and more artistic freedom to maybe write, practice, reflect on what I want to do, is a really wonderful thing for me. I do miss those scenes, LA and New York. I miss the players, mainly, and the energy, having that culture. So many great players kind of, sharing their music, and you can go out and hear it, and you do hear it, even if you're not trying to hear it. It's like everywhere.
Well, Kansas City, I've noticed just with the draft being here, the World Cup's coming, there's a stature that Kansas City's getting. And I think that you cats are really a backbone of, there's live jazz music in the airport now. I mean, there's all of there's all of these different things that are just lifting the tent of this city up. So I think we're going to some really good places. And I think with Bobby at UMKC and just cats like Adam Larson coming to town, there's so much stock that's getting put into this town, and you're definitely a leader of that jazz scene that's thriving now in this town.
Yeah, I think it's a great scene. I agree. I really think it's healthy. I also like the fact that it's fairly integrated. We have a nice community collective mindset amongst the musicians. It's less cliquey than, in my opinion, than LA or New York, possibly because it's smaller. But, it's really nice that way. I feel like everyone's supportive of each other, regardless of their specific genre or their, specific passion, whether it's bebop or something more modern. There's a huge respect for each other in the community, and I see that very clearly here. I think we had it in New York and LA, but I think it's just easier here. I see it better here. It's definitely less cliquey, and I think that's healthy. And hopefully it will even get better as time goes on. I still think we need a few more creative venues that are really there for the artists, which is a hard thing to do because, there's the money issue. But in LA, someone like June Lee, who ran the Blue Whale for years, was great at this. He had this, the Blue Whale was like an artist-focused venue that still had immense success, and I think if he had done it here, it would have still been going. I think the reason it ended after the pandemic was because of the economics of it. It's super expensive downtown LA. Or Rocco, who ran Rocco's in LA. He moved to San Francisco. He was another perfect example of that sort of club owner who knew how to let the artists do what they do and then create an environment which encourages the audience to listen, and it works, And I think Doug and Lori were doing that. Lori Chandler, with Take Five, they really had that same thing, and we need some more venues like that in town. I think, and the Blue Room's good. Green Lady, Black Dolphin, they're all good clubs, but we need some more that are just like listening rooms where, I remember at the Blue Whale, June would come out or the bartender would come out and tell everyone before the set, no talking. You got to listen. It's going to be a set, and then when the set's over, you guys can talk and go to the bar, and then we'll do another set. It'd be 2 sets a night, lots of space for people to socialize. But when they played, they were very specific about having. In fact, they did let you talk in the very back. They're like, if you want to talk, you can talk quietly in the back of the club or outside. And so it was just such a nice thing to do, and that's all it took. And then it created this culture of listening, and then people are like, wow, I really like listening to live music. Yeah. Because, sometimes you have to force someone to put their phone down for a minute.
Certainly. Yeah, certainly. Well, Matt, if anyone wants to pick up the new album, subsequent albums, learn about any live gigs you got, where can they go? The best place?
Probably Bandcamp. It's a pretty nice website, and, the artists get a fair cut. Plus, you can listen to the stuff for free there, and then you can also offer, $1 or $2 for the album, or you can put in $20 for the album. It's really nice. It kind of embraces anyone, if you can afford it or not, and you can still listen to it. It's a little better than Spotify, but it's also on Spotify at all the streaming services. And then I have copies that, when I'm around town on a gig, I'm happy to, offer the same thing, So,
Well, I will tell you this, Matt, knowing you as long as I have being in this scene, and I'm going to encourage anyone out there in Kansas City or anyone out there in the world, you are a phenomenal talent. Kansas City is lucky to have you. And when you perform live, it really does stop a room because there's so much talent and soul that comes out of your horn and what you do. So thank you for taking a minute out. I'm always very appreciative of having the chance to talk to you about your art. I appreciate it. Best of luck with this. And as always, I'm always looking forward to seeing you live out there.
thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time as well. I do appreciate you listening to it and reaching out to me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest cats in Lawrence, Kansas, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Matt for his time, energy, and cool, and coming back to Neon Jazz. If you want to hear more Neon Jazz interviews, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us at YouTube, and for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.